Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm doing my March 2023 wrap-ups, and this month I got to read 6 books. I had a pretty great month. I had 3 5-star reads, 2 4-star reads, and 1 3-star read. So I think overall a pretty great month. Before I get into my full wrap up, if you're watching this video, I always would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and comment down below if you have read any of these books or have any recommendations for me in the future. The first book I read this month actually isn't on my channel because I did a contribution video for the booktube channel, Literally Gladiators. I'll link that video down below if you want to check out my full review. So my first book is Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. I gave this book a 3 out of 5. So this book is basically the story of 9 young men who are studying at the University of Washington, and they make their way to the 1936 Olympics in Berlin and win gold. I know I'm spoiling the book, but it is in the title of the book, and it's an interesting book because even though you know the outcome of the book, it's still quite an enjoyable read, and you don't really have to be a rowing or sports fan to enjoy the book. I still quite enjoy it, and I really enjoyed the stories of these 9 young men growing up during the Great Depression against all odds, kind of being just your everyday people and winning Olympic gold. The reason why I gave it a 3 was I just wasn't in the mood to read a sports book, and maybe because I'm not American, so I didn't feel that rah 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 pride. And I also felt the book lacked for me because it only really highlighted one of the boys' backstory, but I wish it highlighted all of the boys in the boat's backstory. So that was lacking for me, but other than that, it's still a great book. And they're also doing like a movie adaptation that I think George Clooney's production company is backing, which I think will be really fun because I do think it will be a fun action sports movie. The next book I read was Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I gave this book a 5 out of 5. It was my first time reading it. I didn't read it in my youth, and this book was great because I think it's like gonna be like the what's the word, like the pivot point of me getting into sci-fi. It's not the first ever sci-fi book I've read, but it's the first one I'm just like, wow, I really enjoyed it. So basically, if you don't know about this book, we meet Ender, and he lives in this like world where it's kind of like ours, but slightly different. It's obviously in the future, where children are selected at a young age to train at battle camp, and then they ultimately are able to commandeer their own fleet to go against these buggers, which is like this alien species that had invaded us in the past, and now we're just trying to protect our world. And basically this book is about Ender. He's super young. I think in the book he's 6 up to 13, and basically it talks about him being taken away from his family. He's kind of like seen as like the chosen one by the teachers at this battle camp, and there's a lot of pressure. And I don't know, like I feel like me describing this book isn't that good. And like again, I'm not into sci-fi normally, and a synopsis I'm like, yeah, it's an okay book. But when I read it, I just really enjoyed it. I think it's because the author is before he was a writer, he was a screenplay writer. So I think maybe he was able to write a very action-packed prose into this book, and I really enjoyed it. I think the book is really good because one thing that stood out for me in the book is Ender's sister and brother actually take use of the net back then, where they like write articles and are able to change the mind of the world and politicians and like that kind of stuff, which for me blew my mind because this book was written like 1980s, and the author was able to like have that foresight of the internet nowadays. So I feel this book was just really great. I really recommended it. I also watched the movie adaptation of it. It came out in 2013. The movie isn't that great, however I do think it did the best it could because I think the world is very difficult to capture. The next book I read is The Maid by Anita Prose. I gave this book a 5 out of 5. The best way to describe this book is it's kind of like a murder mystery. And also, if you read Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine and you enjoyed the character Eleanor, I think you really enjoy this book too. Basically, we meet Molly, and she is a maid at the hotel. And one day she's cleaning and she finds one of the regulars is dead. And basically, very quickly, it is a murder mystery. And there's a whole ensemble of cast. And it's just very interesting because Molly, as I said, if you enjoy Eleanor from Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, she seems to be on the spectrum or neurodivergent. So everything she is observing, it's not very obvious to us. But because, you know, if you're reading this book, you may be more not neurodivergent. Sorry, I don't really know the wording. So you're able to have context clues. So it's kind of like an interesting like murder mystery, trying to figure out what she's telling you, but what she's observing is very obvious and not very clear. Is the truth, but you can kind of like deduce what the truth is. So it's really fun. I don't want to spoil the book any more than that. I just thought it was a really fun read. The next book I read, which was not such a fun read, but still a 4 out of 5, is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is also a sci-fi book. I believe it was also written in the 1970s. And this book, I said, is not a fun read because it's very heavy. It's basically a woman, Dana, she is living in the 1970s, and one day she is able to time travel, not by choice, not consensually, back to the 1800s in Maryland. So basically in a plantation, and Dana is black, so she is basically a slave. And this book is very graphic, very gory, talks about the slave trade and that time in the 1800s. And basically when she comes back to his plantation, she realizes that the slaves on this plantation, also the slave owner's son, who is white, is her ancestors from the generations ago, because she knows back in her family's day that at some point there is a white man who marries a black woman, and then that starts her family tree. And I think she always assumes that it's because it's a love arrangement, but she meets these relatives and it turns out like, whoa, like my great 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 grandpa was actually a slave owner. So how did that happen and come to be? So it's very interesting because this book is quite heavy. Again, it's science fiction, but I almost feel it's like historical fiction because it's something that actually happened, and it's a way to learn and read about slavery and personify it. And yeah, it's just a very heavy book, but I think it's really important. And I think the author does also a good job, not so much empathy for the slave masters, but understanding why slave masters are slave masters, and understanding because they're a product of their environment. Not that it justifies what they did, but it definitely kind of explains why they become slave masters, because the father teaches the son. I don't know, it was just a great read, but again, very heavy. The next book I read is by a fellow booktuber, Just the Book Freak. It is The Lakeside Cemetery by Jessica Haas. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. This book I went in blind because I just wanted to support her, and honestly, it was a great book. Basically, the premise of the book is we meet Kara. She's 25 years old. She's working as a barista, and she walks the cemetery every day. She doesn't have a lot of friends. She's lost friends, but she's missing this human connection. And one day she happens upon the statue of an angel at the cemetery, and its hands are in prayer position, and she takes a selfie because the statue shares the same family name as her. And then when she looks at her photo, the hands have changed on the statue, and she notices an object in the hand. So she, long story short, she gets access to this object, and then basically the statue comes alive and starts unearthing the grave nearby. That's where I'm going to stop the book, but this book was just like very magic realism. Didn't know where it was going. It was darker than I expected. It's about like making new friends, letting go of the past, and it's just a great read. I recommend it. The last book I read, this is already going to be a top 10 books of 2023 for me, and it's Peach Blossom Spring by Melissa Fu. I gave this a easy 5 out of 5. This book was amazing. It's basically a multi-generational, multi-decade book set against the backdrop of China from the 1940s to 2000s. It talks about Mei Lin, the mother, Ren Xu, her son, Lily, ultimately Ren Xu's daughter in America. It goes from China, Taiwan to America. It's just a great book. I read this book on my flight back from Arkansas back to Calgary, and it was like an 8-hour travel day, and maybe because I was running out in 2 hours of sleep, but I was just crying my eyes out on the plane ride. It was just so great, so beautiful. It was just amazing, and it really talks about the idea of when you're in a war-torn country, you do anything to stay alive for you and your family. The idea of always looking forward, never looking past, but also honoring the past. It's just a great book. Please read this book. I loved it. Thank you for watching until the end of my wrap-ups for March 2023. If you read any of this book, please comment down below. Love to hear what you thought. If you're watching until the end, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.